Good afternoon. To tee off the conversation that the four of us are going to have, I'm going to briefly share some of my research and teaching on retrofitting suburbia and why I think it's so important. So, number one, most Americans live in suburbia. That should be reason enough that we should be looking at suburbia. But most of those folks living in suburbia today do not fit the 1950s stereotype of a white nuclear family with young kids. Suburban households today are much more ethnically diverse, and surprise, nearly 70% of suburban households do not have kids in them. 70%. The baby boomers are still there, but their kids have long since fledged. Another dramatic change is that despite having been the engine that fueled the white middle class, since 2005, more Americans in poverty have been living in suburbs than in cities. And that just continues, that number continues to grow. Our affordable housing crisis only adds to their woes. And it is largely due to the fact that suburban zoning codes have generally not kept up with these demographic and market changes. 75% of land in US metro areas is zoned exclusively for single-family houses. Yet, the majority of households are 1 to 2 person households. And not all of them want or can pay for a standalone house. Exacerbating the zoning code problem is the fact that suburbs' transportation, water, energy, and social infrastructure remains largely stuck in the low-density, late 20th century patterns that privilege private realm services over the creation of shared public social space. And to add to that, not only are we stuck with all this infrastructure that's low density, it's aging. And it's becoming increasingly clear that property tax revenues at low densities don't come close to paying for the maintenance, let alone the replacement of all the vast suburban roads, pipes, and wires. And that's not even getting into the impacts of climate change and COVID. Nonetheless, while many longtime suburban residents are fearful of change and understandably want to preserve their low-density suburban lifestyle, there is tremendous demand for the gentle densification that can support more urban, more inclusive lifestyles in the suburbs. And while politicians may fear being thrown out of office, we'll hear from Ted, may fear being thrown out of office if they support urbanism in suburbia, the fact is that suburban municipalities really need the higher tax revenue per acre in order to repair and maintain the existing infrastructure. So my research and my studios, co-taught with Ingeborg Rocker, with Joel Jesu and Jun Wang, have focused on how to retrofit the suburbs' now obsolete, mostly commercial properties, the dead malls, dying office parks, commercial corridors, etc., into more sustainable places with more sustainable social, transportation, water, and energy infrastructure. 3 years ago, Ted Terry was elected commissioner of District 6 in DeKalb, a largely suburban majority-minority county east of Atlanta. He told me he had a 4-year term and he wanted me to lead 4 studios in his district to help him advance the Green New Deal agenda that he had just campaigned on. So today, instead of showing the built examples that I've documented in my database and 2 books, I'm going to show student proposals for DeKalb County that have learned from and expanded on the built examples. I'm not going to show the projects in detail. I'm simply going to show specific ways in which selective projects have addressed the 6 challenges that the suburban infrastructure was never designed for, and that I'm showing in this slide. Disrupt auto dependence, improve public health, support an aging population, leverage social capital for equity, compete for jobs, and the biggie, add water and energy resilience or climate change. So challenge number one is disrupt auto dependence. Clearly, the post-war suburbs were designed around cars, contributing significantly to the emissions that fuel climate change and a host of other problems. If we simply added bike lanes and sidewalks to existing suburban streets, half of those trips could be made by bike. Not by everybody, not all the time, but it could be super impactful if it was also combined with mixed-use, walkable redevelopment destinations and trails and more connected street networks that would make people actually want to ditch the car. So that's exactly what Tarek, Joel, and I challenged teams of students to explore last year on 6 sites along the 6-lane East Memorial Drive between I-285 and Stone Mountain. It's a commercial corridor that's seen very little new investment in 40 years. So in addition to building on the parking lots with more walkable urbanism, the proposals also recognized the potential to greatly increase connectivity with trails along the creeks, shown here in green, and with a new parallel road between the first 3 sites, enabling local trips to stay off the arterial. To further increase connectivity across the arterial, this team put Memorial Drive on a road diet. They calculated, this is a real thing, road diets. We didn't make it up. They calculated that the average daily traffic count could in fact be handled by 4 lanes instead of 6. They reduced the posted speed and provided more generous tree-lined sidewalks, put a park in the middle in a median that serves as both for bus stops and as a safe haven for those crossing the road. They also, a little more imaginatively, proposed an eco bridge over Memorial Drive between 2 creekside parks to allow animals and people to cross safely, and also to be a visual cue to drivers to slow down. So the safety implications of some of that design was mostly about the social interconnections, but the safety implications lead to the next challenge: improve public health. Suburban living has significant health risks, many of which are due to cars. Car crashes are the leading cause of teenage deaths in suburbia, and the sedentary and teenage deaths, period, actually. And the sedentary lifestyles that cars engender lead to higher rates of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. Suicide rates are higher in suburbs than in cities, and often correlate with the loneliness epidemic and the isolation that is a direct result of how suburbs are designed. Again, there are lots of strategies shown in the blue here that we can and should be doing. I'm going to show another one of the Memorial Drive projects, this one focused on access to healthy food. So this was located at the Indian Creek MARTA station. It's an underused 30-acre park and ride at the end of the east-west MARTA line. It has bus access off of I-285, but is otherwise completely disconnected from the neighborhoods around it. In addition to proposing trail and street connections, this team proposed accommodating the park and ride spaces in parking garages along the highway, and then on top of the old parking lots, build a transit, food, and trail-oriented development. Through orchards, vertical greenhouses, and rooftop farms, their design, they calculated, could produce 56% of the neighborhood's food needs. They also integrated this with rainwater harvesting, energy reductions, a mix of uses, and a main food street with restaurants and cafes as a way to build social capital. Now, suburbia in general always invested more in making a beloved private realm than in investing in great public gathering spaces and social infrastructures. Yet it's exactly public spaces and social infrastructures that are needed as a result of the ethnic diversification and the increasing isolation brought on by COVID. This is particularly true of East Memorial Drive, although designed as the route that connects the Georgia state capitol to the largest Confederate memorial in the world. That's why it's called Memorial Drive, a nice Jim Crow contribution. The population along it now is mostly African American, with a high number of immigrants from East and West Africa and the Caribbean. In this team's proposal, they analyzed the existing social infrastructure, preserved it, and laid out their redevelopment to knit them together. Their new Main Street connects an existing park, a memorial, and health center to new shops, apartments, and a movie theater. The theater is at the entrance to new movie studios that the owner of the site told us he wants to build. The upper right image shows how they used a mural art wall and hotel to wrap the movie studio. And then most importantly, how they that upper right drawing shows how they created two parks to link the existing Ethiopian community center across Memorial Drive to the Eritrean community center right behind their site. These provide gathering spaces for building much more inclusive social capital and for combating loneliness. Climate change and the need to add water and energy resilience is obviously an enormous challenge. No one was thinking about sustainability when we built the suburbs and the energy and water-heavy lifestyles that they now require. By having high-performance buildings and urban design students co-teaming, all of the teams in these studios thought a lot about environmental performance. In this one, the large dead strip mall's proximity to the flood-prone junction of two creeks led them to redesign that junction as a stormwater park and make it the focal point of their new development instead of the neglected back. As such, it provides both needed social infrastructure and has the capacity to contain floodwaters as climate change storms' severity increases over time. On the energy side, while the designers initially thought it made sense to place tall office buildings facing the highway, their high-performance building students' energy models showed that such a west-facing location would increase energy use from air conditioning substantially. The final scheme modified the heights, placement, and orientation of tall buildings accordingly. In 2021, the studio that we did collaborating with the county also focused on adapting to climate change, but this time the sites were two large dying shopping malls, the North DeKalb Mall and the gallery at South DeKalb, which is still usually referred to as the South DeKalb Mall. Both malls flattened their sites and drained their runoff directly into the creeks behind them, severely diminishing their water quality. This team solved that problem by also creating a stormwater park, or a series of them, but it did so by discovering that the mall had been built on top of a former creek. They proposed restoring the original hydrology and daylighting the creek in a series of central parks where water would be slowed and cleansed before entering the creek below. This team also proposed repurposing the concrete department stores, preserving their embodied carbon, and topping them with the sports fields that the local high school told us that they need. At the South DeKalb Mall, this team, in terms of energy, just made one really big and really impactful move. They significantly reduced the energy use by shifting the grid orientation exactly 21.76 degrees west of true north. That reduces solar radiation on the facades and increases outdoor thermal comfort and walkability. Now, it may surprise you, but 80 to 85% of jobs in the US are more than 5 miles from the central business district. and they take a very low-rise, auto-oriented suburban form. The pandemic and work from home have introduced great uncertainty into the office market, but the suburbs have leveraged their proximity to workers to actually begin attracting office workers back by introducing the urban amenities into office parks and commercial places that folks are no longer, as many of them, accessing in downtown. At the same time, the labor shortage caused by the retiring baby boomers isn't going away anytime at all soon. And there's continued high growth in entrepreneurial startups, incubators, and small businesses, especially in the cheaper suburbs than in the expensive downtowns. This team, working on the South DeKalb Mall, found that most residents near the mall were commuting very long distances to job centers. And so the team employed a variety of strategies to revitalize employment at the former mall. They repurposed the Macy's with healthcare and urban ag, put incubator for small businesses into 2 other retained portions of the mall. And at the same time, as they were making it mixed use and putting in a lot of housing, much of it was live-work units. And they integrated childcare into the MARTA bus hub that MARTA has proposed at the site. Last challenge, support an aging population. Most of the baby boom generation, who the post-war suburbs were designed for, continue to live in the suburbs, even though it's a lousy habitat to try to age independently in once you shouldn't be driving. In 2019, 1 in 8 people in Metro Atlanta were over 65. In 2030, 1 in 5 will be. So one of the best ways to support an aging population is with walkable neighborhood infrastructure that is designed to be car light and even car-free. That's the goal of this semester's studio for the area, including and surrounding the DeKalb Farmers Market. We're partnering with Via, an on-demand van taxi service, with MARTA, who is interested in proposals for workforce housing at their rail yard and bus depot there, and with community leaders. And to help us unlock the greatly expanded social opportunities provided by car-free urbanism, we're looking at Barcelona's superblock system and cul-de-sac Tempe's skinny missing middle courtyards. So last slide, I hope I've convinced you that we don't need to tear down any more trees and sprawl outwards ever again. We have plenty of underused parking lots and aging buildings to retrofit with much more social infrastructure. Yes, there's resistance to change out there, but it can and is being done when great design is accompanied by policy changes. And that's why community leaders like Commissioner Ted Terry are so important. And I invite Ted to come up to the stage. I'm going to pass the baton on to him. So